great to see so many people here for this conversation between Morgan Quaintance and Simeon Barclay. Thank you so much for coming. Simeon Barclay currently has his solo show in our main space called In the Name of the Father, and Simeon talks about it having initially been inspired by the idea of a letter to his father, and it through his complete transformation of the architecture and the manipulation of the space, he's created an installation which is not like anything I've ever seen before. Incredibly refreshing in that respect, aesthetically surprising, but it's underpinned by a huge number of issues, but issues around stereotypes of masculinity and masculine identity, cultural barriers, and also Simeon's own biography, a shot through this exhibition, which also has its moments of humour, and many other elements which I'm sure will be discussed in the course of Simeon and Morgan's conversation. Morgan is also an artist, and Simeon and Morgan first met, as I understand it, when Morgan was a visiting lecturer at Goldsmiths, when Simeon was studying for his MA in 2014. And that was the beginning of evidently a lasting relationship, and so it's wonderful that you're here together this evening. And among many other collaboration, or several other collaborations, Morgan invited Simeon to have his first solo show in London at Cubit when Morgan was a curator there. So thank you so much for that, Morgan, for introducing London to Simeon. And of course, Morgan is also very well known for his writing as well as for being an artist, and is widely published in Art Monthly, The Guardian, The Wire, and other publications, and it's never short of ideas, sometimes a bit of a provocateur, might I say. Won't go so far as to say a polemicist, truth teller.
Radical truth teller.
But it's always so fascinating to read your text, and so I'm really delighted to welcome you this evening to have a conversation with Simeon. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Margot. Thanks everyone for coming. This is really exciting for me, actually, because maybe let's go back to 2014, right?
2014.
It was really generous to read in the statement, actually, that it said that we met when I was teaching you, which made me think, that's... Because what I thought about that first encounter that we had was that there was an exchange that took place, rather than someone teaching the other person, which I guess is this ideal instantiation of what Paulo Freire talks about in the Pedagogy of the Oppressed. I'm not going to be doing this all night. Don't worry. I'm not going to be doing this all night. Just basically saying the teaching situation isn't one of sage to subordinate. It's one of peer to peer, where you're both having a conversation, engaging in a dialogue where you're learning from each other. And I think when I met you, it sort of allowed me to express some things or realise some things had legitimacy that I hadn't before. And I think part of that was to do with a scarcity of an individual like you who I felt shared parts of my biography sort of existing in the art world. Was it the same for you?
No. I mean, yeah, I think arriving at that point in Goldsmiths, I'd done 3 years in Leeds, then made my way down to London, a year at Chelsea, and then was I was at the Last Chance Saloon at Goldsmiths, and just really trying to, I suppose in a way I'd tried to sort of, throughout my sort of education, I'd sort of been caught up in this dichotomy of trying to sort of ignore or trying to sort of just trying to get a handle on this stuff that was going on in my head. And the first instance of going through an educational setting was a sort of obfuscation. So an idea of just dealing with formal stuff. In my situation, it was coming from Leeds, coming from Yorkshire, and being in Yorkshire, sculpture is prime. And what I did was I spent my time sort of negotiating the sculptural canon, which was informed by my own experience working in industry. And I thought that would just get me by if I just kept to formal matters, if I could just understand my lived experience through formality, then, you know, maybe that would be enough. But, you know, as I went further along through that process, I realized that there was this nagging. I was creating work, but I was sort of alienated from it. I couldn't I couldn't see myself in it, and coming to have to talk about it, it would be really abstracted and convoluted. And so, yeah, it got to the point where at a certain point I thought, right, okay, this is the Lancashire Saloon. I really need to sort of get to grips with this stuff. I need to in a way, practice as if I'd lived. So the sort of multi-dimensional approach, the sort of complexity of my existence up to that point, and that feeling of not wanting to be trapped, wherever there was I suppose, in a sense, you know, the exhibition has many containing mechanisms, and that was what I feared. I feared being contained within any sort of sphere, you know, and that frightened me, because there was this sort of, I felt a kind of status, a kind of staticness when fixed. Even amongst my own peers growing up, there was always this need to sort of to divert, or, you know, to change the to change the context. So at around about that time, 2012, I was sort of wrestling with this stuff, and I mean, yeah, I think when you go through education, what I was aware of, they used to have the Monday night lecture. And this was some, you know, it was some really, I mean, you know, yeah, there was reasons why, I wanted to go, I wanted to be at Goldsmiths, specifically for the fact that I just felt that if I needed to be sort of boxed into a corner and forced to define what it was I was about. And it sort of helped being there, because the critical analysis around the work was really, really strong. But yeah, it was this sense of tying my own lived experience with the history of art, basically, and using that as a vessel, and really sort of getting to grips with the sort of the idiosyncrasy of growing up Black British, and trying to negotiate that and not be fixed and trying to sort of get to grips with a whole lot of markers that I felt, you know, was my experience, but I'd not really seen out there in the art world. I'd not really sort of come across somebody that I could sort of think that was not Britishness in a sort of, you know, that kind of way, but you know, I always remember we only had the one TV at home, and basically I had to watch what my parents watched. And TV's like, you know, really, you know, again, it was one of those things that I denied. I sort of, you know, and all these sort of comics, football, all these things I denied. But once I started drawing upon those things and sort of unpicking them and realizing the importance of that as a stimulus for my work, and it was about that time where, yeah, I was just that was sort of fermenting. That was sort of, you know, I was pulling wide. And as is the case, you can be quite clumsy with that stuff. You're trying to define yourself. You're not wanting to fall within an American sort of language. I knew I just knew it was like rapping with an American accent, you know, a British, you know. It just didn't feel right. I needed to nail these, I needed to have confidence with these sort of markers. And it was just at that point that I met yourself.
Yeah, yeah.
And I don't want to burst a tear or, no, I'm not a joke. But yeah, no, it was really like a kindred spirit.
Yeah, because the thing that I felt also is that, you know, I've been orbiting the art world as you do when you sort of grow up in London. You know, it's quite hard. You end up, you know, Venn diagrams of different cultural spheres that you sort of ghost every now and then. And I remember just thinking, what was I thinking? When I sort of made inroads into it, it was all like high theory. A lot of it was to do with like Deleuze and Guattari and Derrida and all that stuff like in the 90s. And a lot to do with like the YBAs. And then later on I discovered that there was this other world of like post-colonial theory and everyone like bell hooks hanging out with Okwui and Weezer. But it's very kind of high-end, top-tier cultural producers and cultural workers. And then when I started to make stuff or come in as a cultural worker in the art world, it was just the US was really dominant, especially when it came to notions of like race or identity. They seemed to corner the market, and everything seemed to be expressed in a very simplistic, somewhat basic way. And then I started to see younger people in this country adopting that, and I thought, what happens to all the other experiences that maybe, let's say, people of my generation, I don't even like using terms like generation, but things that we've lived through, where are they, and how do we draw on that cultural resource to make work? What happens to all that experience? And I was also unsure about whether or not I could use that experience. Would anybody recognize it? Would it be worth anything? And then when I saw your stuff, one of the first things I saw was that Alex Higgins, the snooker player, right? Yeah, and I just watched this documentary on him, and I remember just being struck by this sort of tragic figure. And I thought, how many other people do I remember from growing up who were like that? And it's not just sports figures or personalities who were flawed, because masculinity at the time had this strange, self-destructive sense to it. But also people that I'd grown up around. There were so many people that I'd grown up around who were like lost souls now because they'd been part of that masculinity and it didn't work out for them. And I felt like I couldn't really have these conversations with people. For example, I was talking to people about, there was I was part of a sort of conference, a symposium discussing sort of East Asian experience in the UK, British-born Chinese experience. And I remember talking about that in relation to my own experience. I was invited to deliver some talk about like gaming or something. And so I started talking about triads, which is a gang that you could join. And nobody knew. But it felt like when we met and started talking, and not just with you, but also with Russell Newell, you remember Russell, and also with Dean Blunt, you know, it just seemed like there was a generation of people who had lived through these strange moments where a lot of stuff was in play, the media scape was changing quite a lot, And we lived through moments where we lived through, like, let's say positions on race had gone through many changes.
Yeah.
So you've gone from people being called half caste to people being called mixed race to being called biracial to being called people of color. Many acronyms come and go. And there's a sense for us that we don't really believe in any of that stuff. But yet there is this cultural richness that comes through in your work, this sort of playfulness that comes through in your work.
No, it was interesting because while I was at Goldsmiths, around about that time, I was using Alex Higgins as this tragic figure. Alex Higgins is he was sort of a mercurial snooker player in the 80s.
Yeah, anti-establishment as
well, right?
That's another important thing. You're not into the centre.
Yeah, no.
That's what I can't sometimes get with about this next newer thing where everyone's wanting to be in the centre.
No. And I remember the image being up in my studio and somebody of Northern Irish descent came in. I wasn't in the studio. And this image was on one of my works, and he spoke to my studio partner, and basically said, why is he using that?
Yeah.
So, my studio partner related the story back to me, and I was like, shit, why am I using that? And then it just clicked. I'd sort of subverted his idea of what I should be making.
Yeah.
And that was the click point. Because he didn't realize that, there was, how many people used to watch, a Crucible game at a final?
Yeah.
He didn't realize that there was how many million people watching this game, and I could be one of them who was really in tune with his style, the way he played the game, the way he was anti-institution. All these factors reigned with me. So I had as much, as much. That's when I realized this is British history. I can take this.
Yeah.
This is I have an investment in this.
And that sounds like there's a spectre like haunting both exhibitions, this one and Reenie's, and it's like Britishness. And I was thinking about that and thinking, how do I feel in relation to this term of like being British and Britishness? And I'm not sure if it's something that makes sense to me.
Yeah.
What does make sense is that like I've grown up in a place where there are certain cultural events, landmarks that I've experienced, and I've experienced communally with other people. And so maybe those commonalities might mark us out as having this thing in common, and that maybe you could call that Britishness. But I sort of shy away from anything that sounds like a kind of essentialism.
Yes, yeah.
You know what I mean? Because another thing that you used, where you used this image of the Spice Boys. You remember, like, can you tell us the image of the Spice Boys? People might not remember this moment. But
yeah, so it was the Liverpool. God, what was it? Liverpool-Manchester United FA Cup final, and the Spice Boys were
John Barnes.
The Liverpool team, because they went out. It was the first year they went out and bought these white Armani suits, and it was it was really kind of out there. I can't remember the point.
Well, what it is like sometimes I find in your work is that there is this there's a certain reverence for flair, and not just flair for its own sake, but flair as an expression beyond one station that allows someone to transcend the conditions that they're in. Either they're using flair to do it, or they're barred from the ability to use flair because it's not supposed to be something that they possess. So I was thinking about that image you used to have on your website of Isabella Rossellini, and we were talking about that in relation to high fashion.
Yeah.
And I also remember looking at high fashion, not being able to afford any of it.
That's right, yeah.
But somehow we were discussing this thing of like, we recognize it, we appreciate it, but for some reason it's barred from us. And I don't want to talk about that bar in terms of like a racial or cultural or class-based thing. There are just some barriers that exist in society. Maybe one of them was masculinity. That you know.
Yeah.
And then you have then you have someone like Alex Higgins, whose flair enables him to like transcend the trappings of a kind of working class experience, and to butt up against the bureaucracy of like the snooker like system establishment. And then you have the Spice Boys, which was kind of like the first hints of a metrosexual existence amongst football players, away from the oranges and cigarettes half time or whatever. You know, like it's like high fashion, it's Armani, it's, you know, it's David James. That was David James,
who was the Armani model at the time. So I think he got them the
deal. But even that's funny, right? Yeah. It's kind of like he's the model, so it's almost, there's something quite homely about it. It's like, look, I can get this little deal for us because I'm working up money.
But also, I think it's that idea of, I think it's, you know, at that time, masculinity's fear of flamboyance. This sort of, this idea of being stripped back and, you know, contained, and, you know, and it really, you know, something like flamboyance brings unwanted attention. And in the case of Liverpool, you know, they were roundly beaten by a team that was had work and ethics in their play. So, And
then, like, just to stay on this thing about people transcending the conditions that they've been born into, like, we can think about that in relation to, like, fictional characters. So when we worked on that project with Dan Projects years ago, I remember you brought in this huge tarpaulin print of Elsie Tanner as a character from Coronation Street. And at this time as well, we were both starting to think about, well, I was getting really into like British television from a certain period, because there was a lot of discussion about the golden age of TV via HBO or like hour-long shows on Netflix and all the rest of it. But in England, we've got this tradition of what they used to call Play for Today, or I think it was on a Wednesday night, and it would be maverick directors given a chance to make a drama program for an hour on really quite challenging subjects. And but also you had this thing of the incursion of the working class for a small period of time, where social realism was like the thing of the day, and a lot of directors were like Dennis Potter, Harold Pinter, Alan Clark were given an opportunity to put these things on screen. So it
was kind of groundbreaking.
Boys from the Black
Stuff. Boys from the Black Stuff. I mean, there's so much content that you can't get hold. I don't know what the BBC is doing with that archive, because you just cannot get your hands on it. But I remember being not able to understand it, but it had a grittiness. I was probably too young, shouldn't have been watching it, but, you know, I remember it having some sort of, you know, I could relate to it in a way. I could relate the characters, the way it was sort of stylized, or, you know, it had a real sort of grittiness about it. And I think what it was doing was tackling stuff that was close, you know, and I could understand it as a voice that I had an affinity to, you know, and it comes back to, you know, the feature Scum, which features within the exhibition. And just to me, this idea of being caught within an institution. I mean, for me, you know, places like schools and, you know, your dealings maybe with the police, you were really sort of butting up to the state, you know.
Yeah.
And what interested me was these characters were trapped, you know, within Scum, are trapped within this state system and have no recourse to sort of get out. They're sort of caught in a sort of hamster wheel. But
Well, can I just stop you there, just to like, people might not know what Scum is, just to like, so we started talking then a little bit about a type of drama that was, I guess, the order of the day in public television for a certain period of time, where certain maverick directors could get away with making things that you probably couldn't today.
Yeah.
And a lot of it was to do with looking at like structures and systems within British society that had a kind of cruelty and indifference built into them, right? And that youth was essentially got to a certain point and then they were just sort of lost. They were lost in this messed up system. And part of this system was these things called borstalls. I don't know if they really exist anymore, but back in the day they existed as a legitimate destination for you if you got too cocky.
Yeah.
You know, that was like, you're basically going to end up in a borstal. And this, and much of the fear about borstalls came through this film called Scum. And Scum was about a borstal, and it had Ray Winstone was the one of the main characters. And he's like an internee in the borstal. But because of his kind of like valiance or his hero, he ends up butting against the system. But around him, all of this cruelty takes place.
That's
People kill themselves. There's a rape scene, which is like,
that
was kind of legendary, wasn't it?
Oh God, yeah. I mean, really quite shocking. But what it is Ray Winstone is sort of brought, you know, he's sort of coaxed into this position as the hero of the piece. But, you know, in my mind, he was still sort of caught within a system that, you know, there was no sort of getting out of the sort of construction that was around him. And I think I was intrigued by the way, you know, systems work to curtail and sort of, you know, I remember sort of being at school and, you know, you could be written off as, you know, educationally subnormal.
Yeah, that kind of that thing,
and just be left to the wayside, you know? So I was very aware of how institutions sort of, you know, they're there to sort of, you know, give you a helping hand, but in the meantime, they can sort of crush you, you know, crush your spirit, crush your humanity, and this really sort of when I was sort of thinking about, you know, puppets and systems and how you sort of negotiate systems, I was really caught by how you know. It's quite difficult to sort of circumvent them, you know.
And what I like about your work as well, though, is that I've got the term cultural archaeology written down here.
Right.
I'm going to circle it.
Yeah.
But a lot of people do that, but it feels like not really an alchemical process where they're turning it into something else. It just feels like they're just representing it in a gallery context, and they don't really do anything to the gallery context. But what was heartening for me that seems to take place in your work is that you bring some of this stuff from like a hinterland which is like fringed by cruelty, fringed by indifference, fringed by spite, and then you bring it into somewhere where it can come into contact with this thing we talked about, flair, but also an intellectual framework where those things can be considered in a way that becomes instrumental in the present. And it's interesting to watch how people don't understand that's what you're doing. I read like the E.D. Frankel, no disrespect if you're here, like review. Yeah. Like he's just gonna get a hard time because time out. He's got to churn out these things quite quickly. He's got it. But even other people. This is what was funny. I was going to bring a slide today to illustrate this. But in 2014, when I still associated with Freeze magazine, right?
Okay.
They asked me to do this thing, which was do the highlights for 2014. And I wrote this kind of satirical thing on the year. People who might not remember this, but there was a change.org campaign to get Kanye West to become director of Venice Biennale. I totally forgot about that. Yeah. Do you remember 2014? Yeah. It's funny, right? There was this picture of him with an Elizabeth Payton painting. He was like a big patron of hers for a little while. Anyway, but around this time, I wrote this in my like best of the year. I'd put you in there, and I looked at it, and it had come back with all of these edits in it. Like, first of all, I was like, why are you editing this? You're not paying for me to do this. This is just a best of list. Yeah. But it was interesting what they'd crossed out. And I'd said, combining the high and the low without sort of like passing judgment on either. Yeah. Talking about white and black British working class experience, but also, again, not making this distinction between high and low culture. And they crossed both out. And in the margins, I was like, what are you doing? Because I called it a rarity. And they were like, I said, what are you doing? This is a rarity. Like, no one else is doing this. Okay. And a lot of the times when I would talk about your work or champion the work, people just didn't see it. And I think it's because there's a sense that if you don't have the cultural experience that someone else is expressing, then somehow you're not going to make the effort to understand it. No. But I feel like you're giving someone the invitation to engage. Like there's one way you can look at it from the surface, like those balls in the different parts of the gallery, and think about it in terms of a game, and isn't it interesting to spot them? But there's like a pathos in there for me, man. Yeah. Because like, I remember those days when the ball was up there. The day's over. Yeah. And you're like so sad. Yeah, I know. You know, or like you're like, who's gonna go up there? Who's gonna go up there? Yeah, who's gonna go up there? Yeah. Or there's an Alsatian in there. Yeah. And it's like, look, Thingamajig tried it and he got bit. You know, he wants to go. And there's a type of poetry in identifying these moments and bringing them back for us to consider in a space where you have time, you know, and energy to think about them in those ways and allow that evocative power to come to the fore. That's why I used to call work like semiotically charged. Okay. It wasn't just like a pretentious way of saying it. It was like saying, let the things do something to you. Let them,
it's quite interesting with the rock, which I named Pitu. So Pitu was this game that, you know, we used to play. So I lived in a, you know, predominantly South Asian community. And it's amazing the transfer. Before we have multiculturalism, which sort of, you know, just hook, line and sinker. But before this point, I was living in this really diverse place and really learning. I was at the forefront of modernism. You only had to go down to the fruit and veg store down the road, and you'd get okra and all this food that just was, you know, I had a relationship to. But yeah, this game Pitu, which comes out of South Asia, Pakistan, you know, and what you did was you sort of took the larger rock, then a smaller rock, and you'd have two groups of six maybe, and they'd have to knock it down. But what I realized within those sort of situations, we were really understanding, within those situations that we came together and played, we were really getting a sense of our difference and breaking ourselves down in a way, and joking about it. So, you know, it might be that, you know, they thought about me, they used to call me Jamaica, because everybody wanted to, you know, they just thought every black person was Jamaica. But I was sort of like, no, I come from, there's a cluster of islands called the Caribbean, and I was sort of educating them. They were educating me about the caste system and you know, different sort of layers of caste, and we were sort of we could take the mick, but we were learning. We were sort of understanding ourselves. directly beyond the sort of framing that was, that was sort of butting up against us. We were sort of deconstructing ourselves in a sense. And yeah, it was just really, it was a really important part of my time because, as I say, Huddersfield brought people from all over the world, and just because of trade and textiles and so on. So it meant that I was in conversation with loads of different people and experiencing food and so forth. And then, to then go out into the world and then be just sort of, channeled into this, again, I was very wary of being caught within a sort of a container, just really, because I knew, we'd been deconstructing ourselves for quite some time. We understood difference in very complex ways. So yeah, it was kind of interesting that. But play is a way to sort of, it's a kind of really good oil, or sort of, to sort of work within those sort of trajectories or whatever.
And I think that's, if I think about what the UK has to offer the rest of the world, I think it is that. I think it is this mishmash thing where everything is mashed against each other, and we're trying to make sense of it, and through that trying to make sense of it, these new things happen, new styles of music, new ways of creating work. And it's like, without wanting to make this sound like a qualitative distinction, I think there is a level of complexity. Oh, this is going to sound bad. But there's a level of complexity present in, I think, work that comes from here that deals with conceptions of gender, what you might call the portfolio that sits underneath identity. I think we're grappling with a sort of level of complexity further than what seems to be coming from the US, for example.
Yes, yeah.
Because there seems to be number one, a kind of cleaving to these discrete categories and a way to the work of self-determination just never seems to be over. Each successive generation comes through and tackles what it means for them to be this specific thing and guards who can express this or that about that specific thing. Whereas when I think about things that have come from here, they're always like a mishmash. I don't know, drum and bass or jungle. I mean, even there was that song by Smiley Culture.
Yes.
Called the Cockney Translation.
Yeah.
And it's this thing of Cockney music and patois, and it's always, that's the sweet spot for here.
Yeah.
Because we're such a small place and we're all on top of each other. Yeah. Okay, so this has gone really fast. It is now 7:15.
Hell.
So maybe we should open up to the audience to see if there's any questions, so you have a chance to get engaged. I've got some more, but let's just see if anyone wants to jump in.
Go easy on me.
It's less of a question, but more of a commentary, because I grew up playing Pittu. And then when I read about it, I couldn't really understand where it was coming from. But your story did, for me, it was very interesting. And because I've only moved here since a month, and to be able to have that shared experience, which is kind of where you're going across time zones and different countries. And it's very interesting and fun for me to be here, so thank you.
No.
I think your art allowed for me to engage and interact in a sense where I could go back to my childhood and I could really relive that experience. And the way you described about breaking the stones, we definitely played with balls of different materials.
Okay.
So in that sense, I think it also translates to me in terms of breaking these cultural barriers on different levels. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, it does. I think it comes down to, it comes down to specificness. I think I realized I really needed to zone down. I really needed to zone down on what I was looking at. I think up to the point where I started to sort of understand a quite singular, or well, my own singular appreciation of my trajectory. It's once I was able to sort of pin that down, then you get, I felt, and I could sort of had the confidence to sort of work with that material. Then it just made sense. So I'm really glad there's a kinship.
Okay, so what I'm going to do maybe is there's a question there, but are there any other questions? Because it would be good to just get the questions. Okay, there's 3. So if I'm going to take all 3 of them, Beautiful. And then you can just So the first one just here.
You mentioned in your intro about denying certain things like football, TV, like kind of, I guess, like cultural bits. And I just wanted to hear more about like why you think you denied those, and what was that moment where you were like, hang on a minute, like why am I not engaging in this?
All right, so why deny? Okay. And then we had a question here and a question here.
You mentioned like archaeology, so I wondered how you kind of tackled kind of putting the artworks, or how you would kind of curate them, decide where they go, like in kind of the dialogues between them in the actual gallery space.
Okay.
I want to talk about fashion, because I know you really love it, and I do as well, and how that influences your aesthetic, your everyday. Okay. And what design are you wearing at the moment?
Oh.
All right,
lovely.
There was one final question at the back. We'll just take that one.
Shit, man.
Yes, for me it was on play, and kind of like, you mentioned it being an oil, and I kind of imagine it being an oil in like the mental machine, and how you kind of, I kind of wanted to hear you, how does play interact with what you do, and how you make things work.
Okay.
All right, wicked. So 4 questions,
Shit.
So last one being play. What about it? How does it work? How is it the oil? That one just then, fashion. How does fashion influence what you're doing? Okay. What designer are you wearing?
Oh, God.
Archaeology, which is more to do with like how do you decide where to position things? Yeah. And maybe we should start with the last one, the first one. First one first. Yeah. Which was why did you feel you had to deny football? And stuff? What was the moment where you realised that you didn't have to deny them anymore?
Let's see. As I sort of gave a sort of brief interlude, I suppose I was just getting to grips with the canon. I try and get my students to sort of get to grips with the canon. Then you get an understanding of where your work sits, or what you're digging into. Where do you come in? How do you sort of achieve difference? How do you sort of make space for yourself? I think I was just, up to that point, all my education had been TVs, comics. It was sort of anything I could grasp onto. I didn't have a major book collection at home. So I just wanted to get to grips with the canon, and Leeds was perfect for that. There's a Henry Moore Institute, there's a library, and it was just right. Okay, I need to sort of imprint myself into the sculptural canon. When I got to a point where I was sort of alienated by the work because it was too clean, it had my manufacturing background in it. I could say, yes, I'm proud to make this, and this is how it stands, but it just lacked content. And I think that's for me, the work has always been this process of how do you make works formally, but then how do you bring in content? How do you add value to the work? So yeah, that's basically it.
All right, question 2. How do you decide on where you put your... that kind of curatorial question, like how do you decide where things go?
Yeah.
In this gallery space.
The sculptural canon has been useful, but in a way, what I came into that space and I sort of, it has to work on a domestic scale, architectural scale, museum scale. It's sort of so you could see the rock as a peak. You could see the rock, you could see the floor as a space that the whole of that history that is within that space is standing on. Because if we talk about sort of the Titanic and the sort of, you know, they only saw the peak. They didn't see the many layers, and history is like that. History is layers. So also I was thinking about the spaces that I used to frequent as going to clubs and stuff, and how they sort of, you know, I always think of, for me, basically, the curator is like the promoter in a club. They, you know, they orchestrate a space. They sort of bring that space to a point where you, as a punter, as somebody that is invested in the whole idea of that club, that space, that energy, that whatever, feels at one, comes into that space and feels one. And that's always, that for me, clubbing has had the most major effect on how I sort of install things. But it was looking at these spaces. So you might see the two ceramics, that's the domestic, you know, it's the sort of stuff that your parents do, you know, they've got the fireplace, they put their ornaments on. So, you know, it's the domestic, architectural, and all those other things that I've mentioned, plus landscape, topography, Yorkshire as a topography, highs, lows, how the land is sort of cut out, how it's sort of, how history and endeavour has taken to using that land, and what we have is the textile industry. So it's all these different levels of understanding around that inform the exhibition making.
Wicked answer. All right, let's start with which item?
Oh, come on, Ayo, man.
The top, this.
Really?
Who's the top?
Oh, shucks. Well, I mean, it's like you said, you know, clothes. I'm being a real politician now. But yeah,
tell us who it is.
It's clothes of always. Clothes of always. I mean, it was gladiatorial when we were growing up. You know, you'd sort of maybe get yourself ready. Your mate's coming with the car full of people, and you'd sort of step into the car, and you'd just glimpse somebody's wares, and you think, shit, I've not come correct tonight. Where's... Oh, I forgot my wallet. I just need to go back upstairs. But it was really... it was a way of shape-shifting. It was a way of... I always think about... So my father was a tailor, and basically, as youngsters, he used to, on the days off from the factory, because he'd sort of given up tailoring by the time I'd come along for steady work. But he'd sort of unroll and unfurl all this fabric, and it would sort of cover this green baize table and roll onto the floor, and we'd play within this material. And then he'd sort of, he'd cut, draw. So in a sense, I always think of that as an inspiration. You know, those dark nights where I was sort of putting together a portfolio for university and stuff, and taking over space, you know, it sort of reminded me of that. But also this idea of sort of making a 2D element into 3D, that was really exciting to me and always stood with me. But it was this idea of the suit. He used to make us garments, and we used to walk, you know, sort of like this open corridor here, we'd walk up and down, our aunties would whoop and call us little men and sort of, you know, be encouraging. And you know, it was then that I sort of realized there's a change happening here. From, you know, from the grubby person that I had this suit on, and perceptions change. And that, again, was another factor. It allowed me to sort of transform and play with codes. Because what I like in the British context is, what I like about codes and dresses in the British context, some farmer, you know, he might come up, he's got sort of torn elbows, his cords are fading, he's got some beat up shoes, and but he's sitting on, you know, many acres of land. He's you know, he's got money beyond means, but he's using code with his clothes to turn down a knob. So I like that aspect of, you know, how clothes work. Can we move quickly on now?
All right, so it's like, maybe you'll have to corner him on a one-to-one.
Yes.
All right, so the last question, I can tell you all this if you... so the last question was play. Can you tell us about play? Play being this oil, play being a thing that allows stuff to work.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, before, I suppose before I came into art, I suppose there was many sort of aspects of aesthetics. So, I mean, for example, football, and, you know, in the same way as maybe a bullfighter or somebody, you know, sort of has a sort of aura. Certain footballers had a certain aura, and could do things that nobody else could. And that in itself was a style, it was a way of enacting play, but making something more of it. So at the base level, you know, you're just kicking balls around. But when somebody sort of creates some magic, you know, it becomes another level of play. Another level. It turns into something else. It turns into something that you can appreciate aesthetically and athletically. But play, I mean, as far as... I just think it's a really good lubricant. I think it's, you know, like humour, it sort of allows things to sort of, like a good dumpling soup or something, it allows stuff to sort of feed in and just churn it up, and, you know, it's good for everybody. You know, I don't think anybody's got a problem with dumpling soup. No.
Okay, so we're kind of at the end. How are you for time, Simeon? Have you... How
Well, go on.
Okay, so...
wait, it's 7:30, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Let's... Okay, so is there any more questions? We could take another round, okay? There's one here. Wait a sec. I just want to see if there's any more questions?
Going back to your childhood.
Yeah.
And you was talking about how you was amongst different people, like Pakistani people.
Yeah.
And you was learning about their culture, and they was learning more about your culture.
Yeah.
And you was maybe reflecting more on yourself and thinking, well, the distinction between people of my colour as well. I'm not just like one type of person.
Yeah.
But beyond that, in the community that you was living in, when you talk about the football, and the football gets stuck in the privates or whatever.
Yeah.
And then there's this sense of fear about how you will get that ball back.
Yeah.
And for me, it surprised me because on one side, you've got this community that's opening out to you, and on the other side, there's like a hostility as well. Like you have a fear of going to next door to get the ball, and I'm thinking, what kind of community was you living in? Because if that was me, I would have just I would have just jumped into the garden and got the ball.
Yeah.
Or I would have knocked on the door, or did whatever I had, I wouldn't have had any hesitation because I didn't actually feel threatened by my neighbours. But it seems that you was, and that surprised me. So
you talked about wanting to resist having American reference points, because obviously a lot of the TV you're consuming was American, right? But I'm wondering, it's kind of a boring like art world question, I suppose, but about your like artistic references and where you position yourself in terms of like a British or global art canon, right? Because I was on the phone to my partner when I left your show and I was like, it's amazing, I never see work like that being shown in the UK. It was like a Mike Kelly show, and it was like a Paul Thek show, and I don't, like work like that seems to get pushed under the radar a bit here, or maybe I'm just not seeing it.
Okay.
I wonder how you feel about your relationship to the British and extended art canon, you know.
Okay.
All right, so 2 questions there. First one, fear of the neighbour, where does it come from? Second one, where does your influence come from? What's happening here? Because this person was saying he was seeing a type of way of arranging work that he recognised as like US or something. I would disagree with that, but it's not me, it's you.
Yeah.
So choose wisely. Which one do you want to go first?
Well, the first one, if your neighbour's got an Alsatian dog, that's, what is it? That can, you know, it's not as easy to, I mean, we got on, but I think you're quite, at that age, you're quite young and you're quite, at that age, you're just kind of rambunctious, really. You're just really, you don't have a care. And I think we were growing up also around an aging community. I mean, my dad used to... Yeah, that was the distinction. I mean, my dad, it was like Beirut when you got to his garden fence. Because for some reason, I don't know, but yeah, he erected this barbed wire fence. I mean, it was really, you know, and I was like, shit, you're going to kill some child, man, you know. But yeah, I think it was the older generation. They had a siege mentality where their house was their castle, and, you know, you weren't going to enter.
And also, do you think that it's a type of generation who, for them, children would have behaved a certain way?
Yes,
they would have behaved a certain way. They wouldn't be in the street doing this stuff. And I think it was a bit of a shock, especially from like people. Yeah, if you came from certain places in Jamaica or the Caribbean, in my experience, they're quite conservative places. So it'd be like you'd have to behave in a certain way. Yeah. And I think when people came here, there was a certain sense that in the UK there weren't any rules, especially this sort of intergenerational thing, where there'd be like, where's the respect for your older people? Yeah. And maybe the ball goes in once, it's okay. Second time, it's getting a bit annoying. Fourth time, then they got a dog. Then it's anti-climb paint. Anti-climb paint? Like, I know you've done it because to get your hands out. And then it was the spikes. Yes. Or it could be broken bottles.
Bottles, in
it
cement.
Was just like all of these technologies of exclusion. Or the one that's still around now is the light. Remember that light that you walk past someone's house? It's like floodlight. You know, you're like, I was just walking.
It's kind of, but in a sense, it's kind of playful. I mean, for them, they were getting rid of all that DIY tension because they'd come up with more and more extreme ways to keep you out.
The car alarm.
Yeah. Oh God.
All right. So what this thing?
Let me understand
style.
that. Yeah. Ooh. Oh God. Yeah. So I understand. It's I think about 2012. I'm coming in, and let's see. There is, you're wondering how you negotiate this. I came in, I was at Goldsmiths, and maybe, sorry to implicate the SLG here, but there was about 4 or 5 black Americans showing within the capital. That was just the capital. And their work is it's definitely American, and it's definitely, you know, coached in race. And that don't, you know, and then we're sort of looking back at my sort of, you know, the history here, what we could term Black British production. But you know, of course, at first you have to sort of rally against the institution, but then you know, you would, and you know, it's not to sort of lump them all in, but you know, they all had an intricate way of going about this thing. But what was really beneficial for me was the range of works in their practice. Somebody like Donald Rodney would be, you know, quite. That's someone. Yeah, it's a shame that he was, because he was.
Donald Rodney was a black contemporary artist.
Yes,
sort of really exciting.
Conceptual.
Yeah, conceptual. Someone who was going somewhere really exciting, but passed away. I can't remember. Was it sickle cell?
Yes.
Suffered from sickle cell anemia. Had a solo show here.
Yeah.
Your
tenure.
Yeah. But he was exceptional.
Yeah. And some of the, you know, like Sonia Boyce's early drawings.
Yeah, the early
you know.
stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I could name, you know, various artists that would be sort of ramped within that. But at the time I was coming to the fore, we talk about the Whitney Biennial, you know, and this. Can you explain what was going on there? This sort of, how I see it is, at first we're not allowed at the table, and then we're allowed at the table, but we have to bring difference or.
Yeah. So like, because I think part of what you were saying as well is like, I'm guessing the people you're talking about is a kind of irreverence in what they're doing. So Mike Kelly and Paul Tech, I mostly know for like hyper-realist sculpture, but like, but what I would argue is the distinction between maybe a US point of view is that it comes from a very specific type of slacker demographic, and it references a type of subcultural literacy that I think is slightly different to what's happening in Simeon's work, in that these aren't sort of, we're not talking about underground bands, or we're not talking about this like established pantheon of like subcultural things to reference in order to, you know, it's a slightly different vocabulary. But I think you're right in terms of thinking that there is a difference in tone, although I would say it wasn't a US thing, because there's many artists who do this, but in different ways. Adam Farah, for example, is someone who does it, but it's a different thing. Hardeep Pandal does it, it's a different thing. Dean Blunt does it, but it's everyone's, they're all people who are using their cultural resources.
Yeah.
But I think what happened, like around that time, around like 2012 and all that, I mean, the art web was different. It was mad different, and it was kind of boring, you know, in my opinion. People were just banging on about W.G. Sabel's Austerlitz still, you know, Wittgenstein, you know, people chat. It was like, you know, what?
Internet art.
Post-internet art was the thing that was starting to pop a bit.
Object-oriented ontology. Yeah. These were killing me. They were killing me.
If these topics were people, you'd swerve them at a party. Do you know what I mean? Yeah, right, exactly.
Yeah. And they did, as I said, they did the Monday night lecture, and I just had to get somebody to sign in for me, because it was just really, it was basically what you had was these certain cultural producers, writers that would appear in Frieze, that would end up back at Goldsmiths, and then, you know, it would sort of circulate. And I couldn't, it's not that I couldn't engage with it, but it meant nothing to me. It meant nothing. Yeah. You know, and I was thinking, God, I'm going to be wasting 2 hours of my life trying to sort of get to grips with this stuff.
And I remember I was talking to them about Simeon's work, and they said, it sort of reminds me of the Pictures generation. And I was like, you know, a lot of the times people's reactions, you know what I mean by the Pictures generation? So some you might
Robert
tell me, Margot.
Longo.
Yeah, Robert Longo.
Cindy Sherman.
Cindy Sherman. So it's sort of quite graphic stuff where they were kind of appropriating images from advertising, but in a much more slick way than pop. So I would say that early Jeff Koons is maybe an example of that, even though maybe he's not lumped in so much, but he'd just take a whole Nike advert and just put it in a gallery, you know? They're kind of...
I know they are
pretty banging,
yeah.
I must say. But what I think it also showed is that how certain things were just like pushed out of the art world in some ways. But there was a younger generation coming through who were saying, this is part of our lives and we want to include it. And I think, so now you can see there's this... I think in any given day you can go into a gallery and see someone referencing aspects of pop culture in a more or less slick way, and especially now that we've got this stuff happening on the World Wide Web, or lots of people are like interacting through like Instagram, Twitter, OnlyFans. You know, it's like there's another. It's quite difficult to just go back to the days when it was quite austere, or like someone like the artist Henri Salah. I don't know if you remember him, but you go in a gallery and just be like a single snare drum. And it was just like, there was not much generosity taking place. No. You're like, what is going on here? That's not to say that work is necessarily bad. It's just at a certain end of the spectrum of cultural production that I think alienated quite a lot of people, especially when your contact with it came through this like wire fence of high theory. And you're just there going, I don't understand this, but what is in front of me isn't that interesting anyway, you know? But
I think what was pivotal for me was the sociology section of the library.
Man, sociology.
Goldsmiths.
This is so amazing,
yeah,
isn't it?
That would change my.
Man.
And I used to go in there. I mean, as I say, I used to sleep on Mike's floor, but I didn't. As soon as I found that section, I could sleep at Goldsmiths, and I would just sort of pick.
What made you go there, though? Was that part of the curriculum?
No. It was. I don't know how, but then I picked up a book and it basically documented my life. Why working class kids don't get jobs. I can't remember who it was by. And I thought, this guy's written my history.
Yeah.
And it's plain as day. I just could not, and yeah, it was just expanded my mind. You know, so if we talk about Stuart Hall and the cultural, what is it, up in Birmingham, and all the people that came out of that, and just disseminating stuff, that was the beauty of it.
Because you're talking about Richard Hoggart.
Yes, that's right.
Man, what's the other one? Williams.
Raymond Williams,
Richard Hoggart. That's the whole thing of culture. I've been given the wind-up signal. Right. But just say sociology, I'm totally with you on that. And ethnography.
Yes.
Ethnography
within a British context. Within a British context.
But also, I mean, I don't mind Pierre Bourdieu.
We'll let him in. Cultural, what is it?
Culture Capital.
Capital,
we can't forget that.
Yeah.
And also Loic Quicant, that guy who did the thing about boxing gyms in Chicago.
Yeah.
Ethnography is just up there.
So that was my education, basically.
Yeah. Oh, mine too.
Yeah, good stuff.
All right, so thanks everyone for coming out. Thanks Margot for arranging this or allowing this to take place.
Fantastic.
Thanks Simeon for asking me to be involved.
Pleasure.
I really appreciate it.
Pleasure.
And thanks you all for being so engaged. Nice one.
Thank you.